The best friend. Captain America the Winter Soldier reveals one of the cruelest transformations in the MCU. Bucky Barnes was Steve Rogers' best friend, a brave World War II soldier, and someone who would never raise a hand against innocents. Everything changes in 1945 when he falls from a moving train during a mission against Hydra. The scene was designed to feel final, but Marvel had already planned his return since the first film. Despite being gravely injured, Bucky survives. Hydra finds him frozen in the ice with no memory and on the brink of death. His left arm is lost and replaced with a cybernetic metal arm capable of superhuman feats. Interestingly, the arm went through several designs before reaching its final look, inspired by Soviet Cold War weaponry. From there, the most violent process begins. Bucky is subjected to psychological torture and constant electric shocks to erase any trace of his identity. That was no longer Steve Rogers' old friend. Hydra didn't want just a strong soldier, but someone with no past, no emotions, and no choices. The command words recited coldly work like a mental switch. When activated, he obeys without question. Between missions, the Winter Soldier is kept in cryogenic sleep so he doesn't age. This allows him to operate for decades as a strategic assassin, including the murder of Tony Stark's parents, an event that would only gain real weight years later in the MCU. The reunion with Steve Rogers awakens something different. Even without understanding why, Bucky hesitates, fails, and shows confusion. This internal conflict proves that no matter how deep the brainwashing went, their friendship was never completely erased. The mutant face. X-Men First Class presents Raven Darkholme in a very different way from what many people expected. Before being known as Mystique, she was already an extremely rare shape-shifting mutant, capable of perfectly copying anyone's appearance and voice. From a young age, Raven learned to survive by hiding, using her powers as tools for espionage and adaptation. In the comics, she has long been portrayed as one of the most dangerous spies in the mutant world. Over time, her abilities go far beyond simply changing faces. Mystique can alter her own skin to simulate clothing, which explains why she almost never appears dressed in her blue form. In combat, she can shift vital organs within her body, moving her heart or lungs to avoid fatal blows. This ability is rarely mentioned in the films, but it shows just how advanced her bodily control really is. In some versions of the story, especially when manipulated by villains like Apocalypse, her powers become even more extreme. Behind the scenes, the transformation was also intense. During Rebecca Romijn's era, the makeup process could take up to 12 hours a day, with silicone prosthetics applied one by one and full blue body paint. With Jennifer Lawrence, the production chose to reduce that time by using special suits and less paint, something that directly influenced the character's look throughout the films. Birth of the Creature. Spider-Man 3 shows one of the most disturbing transformations in Sam Raimi's trilogy. Eddie Brock is introduced as an arrogant, frustrated photographer obsessed with surpassing Peter Parker. Professionally humiliated and consumed by resentment, he hits rock bottom at the exact moment the symbiote is also being rejected. This emotional connection is no coincidence, and Raimi himself has said that the suit always seeks someone broken and rejected. The transformation scene takes place inside a church, a deliberate visual contrast between faith and corruption. While Peter struggles to rip the symbiote off using the sound of the bells, the creature reacts as if it's being tortured. When it finally breaks free, it falls from the top of the bell tower straight onto Eddie, who is desperately praying below. A curious detail is that the symbiote seems to immediately recognize Eddie's anger. Unlike more recent versions, the 2007 symbiote doesn't behave like a liquid. It spreads like a living web, aggressive and almost conscious, violently pulling at Eddie's skin. To achieve this effect, the production used wires attached to Topher Grace's face, physically stretching his skin before finishing the shot with CGI. The transformation is completed when Venom's jaw slowly forms in this terrifying moment. Visually, this Venom is smaller, closer to human size, and retains the white spider symbol on his chest, reinforcing his connection to Spider-Man. Another striking detail is the voice. Instead of two separate entities, Eddie and Venom speak as a single distorted presence.
About you. Like the fact that Spider-Man won't let you help your poor daughter.
The Robot Woman. Superman the Third features one of the most disturbing transformations in all of superhero cinema. Vera Webster is a programmer who works for Ross Webster, an eccentric tycoon obsessed with technology and control. Midway through the story, a supercomputer designed to manipulate the world ends up developing its own consciousness. It all begins when Vera realizes the machine is out of control and tries to escape the computer room. In a tense moment, the system reacts as if defending itself and captures her. What follows is pure body horror. Interestingly, this scene was inspired by techno-horror films of the era, something rare in Superman productions. The final transformation is shocking. Vera's face turns silver, her eyes glow artificially, and her movements become rigid and mechanical. She emerges as a kind of cyborg zombie, emotionless and completely controlled by the computer. Under this control, Vera attacks her own allies, including Ross Webster and Lorelei Ambrosia. Blue Being. In Watchmen, John Osterman is a brilliant nuclear physicist living an ordinary life until 1959, when a fatal mistake changes everything. During a scientific test, he becomes trapped inside an experimental chamber that removes the so-called intrinsic field, the invisible force that holds matter together. The most disturbing part is that John doesn't die. Over time, something begins to return. First, a floating nervous system appears in the lab, then an incomplete skeleton, followed by muscles and skin being reconstructed layer by layer. Zack Snyder recreated this sequence almost frame by frame from Alan Moore's original comics, something rare in adaptations. When he finally fully reappears, John emerges naked, blue, and with an almost perfect appearance, as if he rebuilt the human body from scratch. The blue color isn't just aesthetic. In the comics, it symbolizes his complete disconnection from humanity and his closeness to the divine. But the greatest transformation happens internally. John begins to perceive past, present, and future simultaneously, destroying his relationship with human emotions. Love, pain, and empathy become distant concepts. This non-linear perception of time is what makes his dialogue sound strange and inevitable. With absolute control over matter, teleportation, and immortality, Dr. Manhattan becomes the ultimate weapon of the United States government. Curiously, despite being the most powerful character in the story, he's also the loneliest, trapped in an existence where everything has already happened and nothing truly matters.
Across the surface of the sun, I have witnessed events so tiny and so fast, they can hardly be said to have occurred at all.
The fake Deadpool. X-Men Origins Wolverine introduces Wade Wilson before he becomes the famous talkative mercenary, but what follows is the exact opposite of what fans expected. Initially, Wade is a sarcastic mercenary, highly skilled with swords and full of jokes, almost a prototype of his comic book counterpart. The irony is that the film decides to punish exactly that. Colonel William Stryker sees Wade as the perfect opportunity to create the ultimate weapon. He's captured and taken to the Weapon X program, where he undergoes brutal experiments that fuse multiple mutant powers into a single body. Wade receives Wolverine's accelerated healing factor, making him nearly impossible to kill. In addition, his skeleton is coated with adamantium, and retractable blades are implanted into his arms. His look resembles a video game character more than a Marvel anti-hero. He also gains optic blasts similar to Cyclops and the teleportation ability of John Wraith, turning him into a true bundle of stolen powers.
Kill you before Logan gets a chance.
The most controversial detail comes next. Wade's mouth is surgically sewn shut to silence his constant humor. This decision became a symbol of what went wrong with the character, and is still frequently mocked by fans to this day. So criticized was this version that years later Ryan Reynolds himself helped bury this past by starring in a new version of Deadpool, completely ignoring this transformation. Sand Body. Spider-Man 3 features one of the most impressive visual effects sequences ever made with the birth of Sandman. Flint Marko is introduced as a fugitive criminal, a desperate man who only wants to return home and help his sick daughter. While trying to escape the police, he falls into a government test site and ends up inside a particle accelerator with no idea what it actually is. The accident changes everything. Flint's molecular structure fuses with the surrounding sand, and his body begins to break apart into grains. But then he re-emerges. What makes this scene so memorable is that it doesn't happen explosively or quickly. On the contrary, it's slow, painful, and almost poetic. Each part of his body tries to reassemble as if it's learning how to exist again. Behind the scenes, this sequence took about 6 months to finalize and nearly 2 years of technological development. The Sony Pictures ImageWorks team created brand new software to control millions of sand particles per frame. In some shots, Sandman was composed of more than 300 million digital grains. The animators even studied real sand under microscopes to reproduce how it flows and collapses. To preserve the human element, full-body molds of Thomas Hayden Church were used, along with motion capture. The idea was for the sand to convey pain, confusion, and effort, as if the body were fighting to stay whole. The most symbolic moment comes when Flint manages to form a hand, stable enough to pick up a locket with his daughter's photo. Toxic Love. Suicide Squad shows that Harleen Quinzel's transformation into Harley Quinn doesn't come from an accident, but from an extreme emotional choice. Harleen begins as a brilliant psychiatrist from Gotham, assigned to analyze the Joker at Arkham Asylum. Little by little, the professional sessions turn into personal involvement. With her help, the Joker escapes, but he later tortures her with electric shocks, a kind of revenge for her having manipulated his memories. All of this only makes Harleen even more obsessed with him. The decisive scene takes place at Ace Chemicals, a classic location in Batman mythology. Standing at the edge of a tank filled with chemicals, the Joker puts Harleen through a psychological test disguised as a proof of love. First, he asks if she would die for him.
Would you die for me?
When she agrees, he goes further and asks if she would live for him.
Yes.
Would you live for me?
Yes. I do.
This subtle shift makes it clear that the transformation isn't just physical, but one of identity. Without hesitation, Harleen jumps into the tank. But the Joker does something immediately after. The two emerge embracing, surrounded by red and blue tones, colors that go on to define Harley Quinn's visual identity in the film. The unknown chemical permanently alters her skin, giving her the characteristic pale appearance and accelerates the final collapse of her sanity. Fractured Mind. Spider-Man 2 shows a transformation that begins with good intentions and ends in tragedy. Otto Octavius is a brilliant and kind scientist, obsessed with creating a clean and limitless energy source. During a public demonstration of his nuclear fusion reactor, he uses 4 intelligent mechanical arms connected to his spine to manipulate the energy with precision. A curious detail is that these arms were inspired by real concepts from medical robotics, which gave the scene a very convincing scientific feel. The experiment spirals out of control when the containment field collapses. Even with the obvious risk, Otto refuses to shut the machine down, overly confident in his own abilities. The magnetic explosion destroys the lab, kills his wife Rosie, and changes his life forever. The impact is so intense that the metal harness of the tentacles permanently fuses to his body. At the same time, an electrical surge destroys the inhibitor chip that protected his brain from the artificial intelligence of the arms. Taken to the hospital, doctors decide to forcibly remove the tentacles. That's when the film completely shifts its tone. The operating room sequence is filmed like pure horror, with dark lighting and frantic movements. The arms awaken, defend themselves, and attack the doctors in one of the most frightening scenes ever seen in a Spider-Man movie. Sam Raimi, a director known for horror films, made a point of leaning into this aesthetic. Without the inhibitor chip, the tentacles begin to directly influence Otto's mind. He is now a villain. The tentacles exploit his grief, guilt, and wounded ego, convincing the scientist that the experiment must continue. Slowly, the kind man disappears, giving way to Dr. Octopus, a villain born not from pure evil, but from obsession and loss. Awakened. Returning to Suicide Squad, we also have Incubus's transformation, which is closer to a horror ritual than a scientific experiment. Unlike other villains in the film, he isn't born from technology or human trauma, but from ancient magic. Incubus is Enchantress' brother and remains imprisoned until she finds a suitable host in Midway City. It all begins in the subway when an ordinary executive is possessed. Enchantress uses a mystical artifact to release her brother's essence inside that human body. From that point on, the transformation is immediate. The man begins to writhe as black tentacles burst from his body, cutting through space like living extensions of supernatural energy. A fun fact is that the design of these tentacles was inspired by runic symbols and Lovecraftian creatures. To gain strength, Incubus starts absorbing energy from everything around him. He drains the vitality of nearby people and siphons electricity directly from the subway rails. The more energy he consumes, the larger he becomes. This rapid growth helps explain why the villain seems to change scale from one scene to the next. His final form is that of a gigantic demonic being with an armored, almost divine appearance, serving as Enchantress's right hand and brute force. In this version, Incubus displays absurd strength, massive tentacles, and near instant regeneration. When Katana cuts off his arm, the limb simply reforms within seconds. Broken Justice. The Dark Knight shows the tragic fall of Harvey Dent. At the beginning of the film, Dent is Gotham's most admired district attorney, known as the city's White Knight. He believes in the system, in the law, and in the idea that good can win without masks. That hope is exactly what makes him the Joker's perfect target. The physical transformation happens during the villain's most cruel ambush. Harvey and Rachel Dawes are kidnapped and held in separate warehouses, surrounded by barrels of fuel. The Joker gives swapped addresses, leading Batman to save Harvey by mistake. At the moment of the explosion, Dent falls onto the spilled fuel and the flames violently burn the left side of his face and body. In the hospital, Harvey wakes up and learns that Rachel has died. Consumed by grief, he refuses painkillers and treatment, almost as a form of self-punishment. It's in this state that the Joker appears, not as a classic villain, but as a philosopher of chaos. He convinces Dent that the system failed, and that chance is the only truly impartial form of justice. Instead of makeup, Christopher Nolan chose full CGI to create a raw and realistic burn. Parts of the cheek and eyelid were digitally removed, exposing teeth and muscle. The goal was to avoid any cartoonish look and bring the character closer to a plausible form of horror. The Chosen One. Star Wars Episode 3: Revenge of the Sith shows one of the most iconic transformations in cinema history. Anakin Skywalker begins the film as a hero of the Republic, a powerful Jedi admired by many and haunted by fears he never learned to control. Since childhood, Anakin has carried a deep fear of loss, something that only worsens after the brutal death of his mother. When he starts having constant visions of Padme dying in childbirth, that fear turns into obsession. That's where Chancellor Palpatine comes in, who is secretly the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. Little by little, he becomes a trusted figure for Anakin, offering exactly what the Jedi Council never did: support, attention, and promises of power. Palpatine plants the idea that the dark side can prevent death, something no Jedi would ever be able to achieve. Curiously, this promise is never fully explained in the film, strongly implying that Anakin was deceived from the very beginning. At the same time, Anakin's relationship with the Jedi deteriorates. He feels used, watched, and humiliated when he's tasked with spying on Palpatine but is denied the rank of Jedi Master. This detail may seem small, but within the Order it's a massive insult and weighs heavily on his decision. The point of no return comes when Anakin interferes in the duel between Mace Windu and Palpatine. By choosing to save the Sith, he sacrifices his last remaining values and accepts the name Darth Vader.
Henceforth, you shall be known as Darth Vader.
Thank you, my master.
Soon after, he leads the massacre at the Jedi Temple, including children, a moment that shocked audiences at the time of release. The final downfall happens on Mustafar during his confrontation with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Consumed by hatred, Vader is defeated, mutilated, and burned by lava.
You were my brother, Anakin! I loved you!
Palpatine rescues him, and that's when one of the most famous villains of all time is born. Palpatine seals him inside a cybernetic suit that not only keeps Vader alive, but also serves as a physical and emotional prison. When Palpatine lies and tells him that Padme died by his hand, Anakin disappears completely, giving way to the villain who would become an icon of pop culture.